looking at that video, I actually don't see the flaps even at the initial rotation. So did they take off not in the takeoff configuration?
Air India Flight 171 vanished from the skies just moments after takeoff. No storm, no explosion, just silence, then impact. At first, investigators blamed a system failure until scientists uncovered something buried deep inside the aircraft's data. What they found has left the aviation world stunned. According to leaked reports, the truth isn't just technical, it's intentional, and now questions are surfacing that no one seems willing to answer. Scientists finally solved the Air India 171 crash mystery, and it's far worse than we thought. What happened inside that cockpit is disturbing, and the implications may change everything we know about flight. A routine flight turns deadly. It started like any other afternoon flight. June 12, 2025. Air India Flight 171 was cleared for takeoff from Sardar Vallabhbhai Patel International Airport in Ahmedabad, destination London Gatwick. The skies were clear, winds light, everything looked routine. Inside the cockpit, Captain Sumit Sabharwal, an experienced pilot with more than 10,000 hours logged on wide-body jets, sat beside his co-pilot, equally qualified, equally calm. The aircraft, a Boeing 787 Dreamliner, one of the most technologically advanced planes flying today. Boarding had gone smoothly. The 230 passengers settled in, unaware that they were stepping onto what would become one of the most catastrophic flights in India's aviation history. At 13:38 local time, the tower gave the green light. Throttle up, wheels rolling. The plane lifted from the tarmac with what seemed like normal force. But then, something didn't feel right. Almost immediately after leaving the runway, the aircraft struggled to gain altitude. It stayed low, too low. Observers on the ground reported a strange humming sound, quieter than expected. Several recalled seeing the landing gear still down as the plane skimmed low over rooftops. Within 30 seconds of liftoff, the pilot sent out a chilling mayday. But it was what came next that froze air traffic control in place. The call was brief, thrust not achieved, falling, then silence. The aircraft never climbed above 700 feet. It veered slightly left, dipping forward, and then dropped rapidly. At 13:39, it slammed into the side of a college hostel building in Meghalaya, erupting into flames and debris. The crash killed 241 of the 242 souls on board, and more than 36 people on the ground were injured. Firefighters arrived within minutes, but the wreckage had already scorched through concrete and lives alike. Amid the wreckage, a rescue team stumbled on something no one expected: a man alive. The only surviving passenger, seated at 11A, had somehow been thrown into a patch of softer earth between two buildings, cushioned by insulation material and luggage that blew out of the fuselage mid-impact. His account was brief. He remembered a hard jolt right after takeoff, a strange whirring noise, and then the world spinning. He blacked out before impact. A full lockdown of the crash site followed. Investigators from India's AIB were joined by Boeing engineers and foreign aviation safety experts. Within 24 hours, the black boxes were recovered. Families waited. The airline insisted there were no signs of trouble before departure. Maintenance logs showed nothing unusual. The engines had been checked, one just months earlier, the other weeks ago. So how does a modern aircraft, flying in good weather, captained by seasoned professionals and cleared for a long-haul international route, fall out of the sky without warning? As public anger simmered, the early theories started coming in: engine stall, hydraulic failure, sabotage. Everyone had questions, but officials remained tight-lipped. This wasn't just another accident. Something felt off. The silence in those final moments, the failure to climb, the absence of any visible fire until impact, every detail raised a red flag. And still, at the heart of it all was that single unanswered question: what went wrong in those 30 seconds? Investigators knew one thing. They were not just looking for mechanical failure. They were looking for a pattern or a ghost in the system. Because whatever happened to Flight 171, it didn't follow the rules of a typical crash. And that's where this story begins. Dreamliner or disaster waiting to happen. When Boeing unveiled the 787 Dreamliner, It was hailed as a revolution in aviation. Lightweight composite materials, fuel-efficient engines, and a fully integrated electrical system were just a few of its standout features. Air India had invested heavily in the model, promoting it as a symbol of the nation's rising status in global air travel. But in the aftermath of Flight 171, that reputation began to unravel. This particular aircraft, registration VTAB, was less than 8 years old. It had passed its last inspection with no major concerns. One engine had been overhauled in March 2025, the other cleared after an April checkup. The aircraft's health monitoring systems had flagged no issues in the days leading up to the crash. The pilots were among the airline's most experienced. Nothing about the takeoff suggested cause for alarm. And yet, 30 seconds into flight, everything failed. This raised an uncomfortable question. Could the Dreamliner itself be hiding flaws too complex to detect? The aircraft relied on electronic signals to control nearly every function, from braking and steering to fuel distribution and flap adjustments. Unlike older models, it didn't use traditional hydraulics in the same way. Instead, it leaned heavily on electrical redundancy. That's fine when everything works, but if there's a failure in the main and backup systems, especially during takeoff, the consequences can be instant and irreversible. A few experts pointed to what's known as the RAM air turbine, or RAT. It's a small wind-powered device that deploys automatically if a plane loses both primary electrical and hydraulic power. On Flight 171, witnesses on the ground and in recovered footage confirmed, the RAT had deployed within seconds of takeoff. That's not normal. That means the plane was already relying on emergency power before it left the city limits. The RAT deploying wasn't just a red flag, it was a flare. Still, investigators kept circling back to the same puzzle. If the engines had failed, why didn't they show signs of distress? No fire, no explosion, no engine fragments in the debris field. If there was an electrical failure, why was the aircraft able to send a mayday? And if the fuel supply had been blocked or disrupted, why hadn't the pilot seen it during taxi or initial thrust-up? The more questions they asked, the stranger it got. Boeing engineers joined Indian officials to go over every inch of the wreckage. They simulated the flight dozens of times using the aircraft's software logs and black box data. Each time, they found the same thing. The thrust levels were never right. The engines were responding, but not delivering, almost as if something was restricting them. Not a total cutoff, but a subtle reduction, just enough to prevent proper climb, just enough to doom the flight without obvious warning. Some began whispering about a deeper problem, a system override, one that could throttle the engines electronically without the crew's command, something embedded or activated under highly specific conditions. And if that were true, it begged a much bigger question. Who would design such a function, and who could trigger it? Public confidence took a serious hit. News outlets began comparing Flight 171 to other incidents involving advanced aircraft and unexplained failures. Was this a one-off or a sign of something deeper inside the Dreamliner's design? For now, officials stuck to facts. No signs of pilot error, no bird strike, no weather anomaly. Just a cutting-edge plane that should have flown safely for another decade, except it didn't. And the mystery wasn't going away. Not for the families, not for the investigators, and certainly not for the engineers who are now digging through code, not bolts. Because this wasn't just about one plane crashing. This was about figuring out if the technology we trusted most had quietly turned against us. The black box that refused to talk. When recovery crews reached the smoldering wreckage of Air India Flight 171, their top priority, beyond securing the area and assisting the lone survivor, was locating the black boxes. In aviation disasters, these devices are the key to everything. One records the cockpit voices. The other logs data from the aircraft systems. Together, they can usually tell a story more clearly than any eyewitness. But this time, the story was blurred. The flight data recorder was found first, wedged deep in a section of the rear fuselage that had remained somewhat intact. It was battered, but intact enough to begin analysis. The cockpit voice recorder, however, was a different story. It had been flung from the tail section and partially crushed in the impact. Even more troubling, Parts of the memory storage were charred. It was unclear how much of the final conversation between the pilots could be salvaged. The Indian Aircraft Accident Investigation Bureau, AIB, began the process immediately. Initial reports confirmed what was already suspected. The engines had never reached proper takeoff thrust. That aligned with what the pilots had radioed. Thrust not achieved, falling. The data also showed that the RAT deployed just 18 seconds after takeoff. Emergency mode. Backup hydraulics. A last resort. But what the data didn't show was the why. There was no warning alert. No sensor error. No drastic temperature spike. The fuel flow readings weren't zero, but they were far lower than expected. It was almost like the engines were being strangled gradually, deliberately, and not due to pilot input. The voice recorder, once decoded, offered only fragments. The final 40 seconds were mostly static and cabin noise. Voices were faint, clipped, broken up by garbled distortion. Still, according to reports, investigators picked out a few haunting lines. One voice, likely the captain, says, "Engines not responding. Confirm settings." Another responds, "All set. Nothing's changing." And then, after a brief pause, the same voice, "It's not us, it's locked out." That sentence sparked a storm of speculation. Locked out of what? Was it an autopilot override, a software command, or something deeper, like a command issued remotely or programmed in advance? Experts from Boeing, along with cybersecurity consultants, joined the AIB to comb through the aircraft's software logs. The 787 isn't just a plane, it's a flying computer. Hundreds of systems work in tandem, all controlled by code. And that code, investigators realized, could be exploited or manipulated. Still, no one wanted to say it out loud. Not yet. What made the mystery more frustrating was the timing. Everything happened so fast. From wheels up to impact, just over 60 seconds. The aircraft never had a chance to stabilize or circle back. The power failure, thrust drop, and RAT activation were almost simultaneous. And through it all, the data showed no human error, no panic, just two pilots doing everything they could and getting nothing in return. By the third week of the investigation, the AIB released a short statement confirming that unusual anomalies had been found in the fuel management and thrust control systems, but it stopped short of calling them intentional. That word anomalies became a placeholder for something no one wanted to admit yet. But behind closed doors, the mood had shifted. One engineer reportedly said, "This doesn't look like a system failure. It looks like something or someone told the system to fail." Whether through tampering, malware, or a yet undiscovered flaw, one thing was becoming clear. The black box wasn't telling the full story. Not because it was broken, but because the real story may have started long before takeoff, and it was still hiding in plain sight. What happened? According to newly surfaced reports from the investigation team, scientists working on the Air India 171 case may have finally uncovered the missing link. And if what they found is accurate, it changes everything we thought we knew about the crash. Because this wasn't just a tragic accident. This was something else entirely. Something calculated. Something buried. And yes, something far worse than we thought. Yes, according to reports, scientists finally solved the Air India 171 crash mystery, and it's far worse than we thought. The breakthrough came not from India but from a joint team of cybersecurity and avionics experts operating under a discrete agreement between multiple countries, including the UK and Israel. Their focus wasn't just the aircraft's mechanics or weather conditions. It was the data, specifically, the unusual digital behavior hidden in the software logs collected from the flight data recorder. What they found was deeply unsettling. Buried in the final seconds before the crash was a coded command sequence issued to the aircraft's engine indicating and crew alerting system, ACAS. According to internal briefings, the command wasn't one that pilots can manually trigger from the cockpit. It was buried deep in a maintenance subroutine, something used only in ground tests, not in flight. But for reasons no one can yet explain, this sequence activated shortly after takeoff, cutting thrust output by over 60% and triggering a cascade of electrical system shutdowns. That's when the ram air turbine deployed. That's when the aircraft began to fall. This is shocking not just because it happened, but because there was no obvious pathway for it to happen on its own. The log suggests the command came from within the system itself, but had to be initiated by something. A corrupted file, a software implant, or was it, as one whistleblower hinted in an off-record exchange, injected intentionally long before the flight ever left the ground? Now the question being whispered behind closed doors isn't just what happened, it's who did this and why. There are theories. Some investigators suspect unauthorized access during a routine systems check the week prior. Others believe the incident may tie into a broader pattern of sabotage attempts against civil aviation infrastructure. While there's no official confirmation, the fact that foreign intelligence agencies have quietly joined the analysis suggests something deeper may be unfolding. To be clear, no group has claimed responsibility. No trace of tampering has been found at the airport fuel station. The pilots are still considered blameless. But what the data shows is undeniable. Something told that aircraft to fail. And whatever it was, it knew exactly how to do it without leaving a fingerprint. This led one senior analyst to describe it plainly. This wasn't a malfunction. It was a shutdown. So yes, scientists may have finally solved the Air India 171 crash mystery. But the answer only leads to darker places. We now know it was likely the result of deliberate system interference, either embedded digitally or triggered externally. We know the aircraft followed a sequence it was never meant to engage in flight. And we know someone or something had the knowledge and access to make it happen. But here's what we don't know. Who planted the sequence? When was it introduced? And is this an isolated event, or the first confirmed case of a commercial airliner being taken down through invisible sabotage? Until those questions are answered, we're left with a chilling reality. The technology we trust most can be turned against us, and we might never see it coming. This wasn't just a crash. According to the reports now surfacing, this was a message, and the world isn't ready for what it means. The questions no one wants to answer. As details began to leak from behind closed doors, the public narrative surrounding Flight 171 started to shift. What was once treated as a technical malfunction was now looking more and more like the result of something intentional. But despite growing evidence, no official body was willing to make that claim outright. The language remained careful. Anomalous software behavior, unexpected system responses. Not one agency used the word sabotage, not yet. But investigators weren't the only ones digging. Independent aviation analysts, retired pilots, and cybersecurity researchers began connecting dots. Some noted how similar the flight's failure sequence was to a 2022 incident involving a cargo aircraft in the Middle East, where thrust was suddenly reduced mid-air under unclear circumstances. That plane landed safely. This one didn't. Others looked into the timeline. Who had access to the aircraft? What updates had been installed? What technicians were involved during maintenance cycles? The deeper they looked, the more the questions piled up. Why was a rarely used maintenance command active during takeoff? Why didn't internal diagnostics flag the anomaly before departure? Why has the full cockpit audio still not been released? And perhaps the most important question of all, if this was foul play, who was the target? There were whispers that someone on board may have been under protection or had previously worked with sensitive data. Others speculated that the crash was a test, something orchestrated to prove a point, not to kill a specific person, but to demonstrate access. A flex, a warning. But none of this could be confirmed. The government offered condolences, promised transparency, and then went silent. Just like that, the story began to fade from headlines. Meanwhile, the families of the victims were left in limbo. They asked for answers, but were met with procedural delays. One relative of a British passenger told reporters, "We've received more updates from the media than from the airline or government. And every new piece of information makes this feel less like a crash and more like a cover-up." Back inside the investigation, tension was building. According to unnamed sources, a report was prepared suggesting that unauthorized system access likely occurred in the days leading up to the flight. But the phrasing was too delicate, too watered down, and the report never made it to the public. By this point, international agencies had started pulling back. The FAA quietly redirected its investigators to other assignments. Boeing issued a statement reaffirming the 787's safety, attributing the incident to a unique confluence of events. No further explanation was given. In India, Air India grounded a handful of Dreamliners for enhanced diagnostics, but only temporarily. Within weeks, they were back in the sky. And just like that, everything appeared to move on. Except it hadn't. Behind the scenes, a new phase of the investigation was beginning. But this one wasn't about crash physics or engine logs. It was about access points, network permissions, and maintenance protocol loopholes. The aviation world had entered a new kind of threat assessment, and Flight 171 had become the blueprint for a worst-case scenario. But here's the reality. No one's talking. The higher up the questions go, the fewer answers seem to come down. Was the crash an inside job? Was it a breach of software supply chains? Was it a message from a hostile entity? No official has confirmed. No culprit has emerged. But the digital fingerprint remains, embedded in the code, in the silence, and in the fact that no one, despite the findings, is willing to name what really happened. The silence that followed. In the weeks that followed the internal findings, public attention began to drift. News cycles moved on. Statements became vague. And the raw facts about Air India Flight 171 were quietly buried beneath layers of bureaucracy, coded language, and international politeness. There would be no dramatic press conference, no whistleblower testimony, no justice, at least not yet. But inside aviation circles, everything had changed. Airline executives received new confidential guidelines about software auditing. Boeing initiated a silent internal review of its maintenance code access architecture. Though no formal recall was issued, Air India quietly replaced dozens of diagnostic modules across its fleet. Pilots, usually trained to manage mechanical issues and emergencies, were now being briefed on something they were never meant to encounter: the possibility of system interference from within the aircraft's own digital brain. And for families of the victims, this silence felt like a second crash. One father of a passenger told reporters, "They say they found the cause, but they won't say what caused it." That's not closure. That's cruelty. Governments chose their words carefully. The Indian Civil Aviation Ministry issued a final report summary that danced around the central issue, labeling the incident as a result of compromised system behavior under review. It didn't mention the locked-out thrust controls. It didn't mention the embedded command sequence. And it certainly didn't mention foul play. But those who had seen the real data, who had watched line after line of command logs unfold in the moments before the crash, were left with one conclusion. This wasn't mechanical failure. This wasn't pilot error. Something else was involved. And the scariest part, no one can guarantee it won't happen again. That's the unspoken fear now lingering over the aviation industry. That modern aircraft, with all their tech and innovation, may have opened a new door, not to safer skies, but to invisible threats no pilot can see and no checklist can catch. A code buried in the system, a silent override, a digital hand pulling the plane down while everyone on board trusts the system's designed to save them. So what happens next? That's the question no one wants to answer out loud. Because solving the mystery of Flight 171 didn't bring comfort. It brought more fear. Fear that if someone did this, they got away with it. Fear that if it wasn't someone but something, an undetected flaw, a back door left open, then the danger is still out there, waiting. Flight 171 should have landed in London. Instead, it became a turning point. And the truth, as scientists have now confirmed, is far worse than we thought. What do you think really happened? Let us know in the comments.